music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with me, Tom Alvarez. My guest on today's episode is Claudia Polley. After receiving her training as a vocalist at the prestigious Juilliard School in New York, she became a disco music star in France in the 1970s. In the 1980s and 90s, she produced critically acclaimed jazz and blues recordings for Mapleshade Records. Also a trailblazing broadcaster, both locally and nationally, she became one of the first female sports directors in the country. Today, she is best known for her work as a historian and preservationist. Join me now as I go on the aisle with Claudia.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug, ignored a leaky faucet, pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Well, if it isn't Claudia Polley, Jane Polley's sister.
Thank you, Tom, for remembering the family.
Okay, so we need to let people in on the inside joke. Tell us that story.
Well, I'm not even sure what led up to it, but David Letterman and I were on the same radio station, WNTS, which was on the south side of Indianapolis, actually Beech Grove. And this is, almost 50 years ago.
Yeah, I was wondering about how long it is I've known you.
Yeah, this was 1974, 75, I guess. And Letterman had a talk show on WNTS, which was owned by Jeff Smulyan. This was the beginning of the Smulyan media empire. And Letterman has since called Jeff the media mogul, which accurately reflects who he is. But at any rate, Letterman had the show on just before mine. I had a talk show on the radio. I was hired as a news reporter, news anchor, actually.
Yes.
And but WNTS was a daytimer, which meant that it ran when the sun was up. So from sunrise to sunset, and of course, starting in the spring, sunset is later and later and later. And so I would get the show after day for as long as the sun was up. And so that was one day David described me as being Jane Polley's twin sister and said, "Their mother is so proud." And this was not long after I had interviewed the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan,
yes,
who had not realized that I was black. And we did the whole interview, and at the end, he had been referring to blacks as some lovely moniker during the entire interview.
Yes.
And I didn't. It wasn't even baited because he didn't know I was black. And so when it came down to finishing it all off, I said, well, Mr. whatever his name was, thank you so much for the interview. And as one of those blah, blah, blahs, I'd love to say an interesting perspective for today. And he just stopped. There was nothing. And then there was a click.
And I was sitting in my home at the time. I think I lived in my little cottage on 46th Street, and I just about fell out of my chair because I could see it coming. I knew that you would have a retort. And, you know, I know what he called you, and what he said was he made reference to the Mongol race. And you said, well, I happen to be a member of that, that group. And so, anyway, we're going to jump around today because that's what old friends do, right?
That's right.
How long have we known each other? It's 50 years?
It has been 50 years.
Do you remember how we met? Well, we were in broadcasting. I was at Channel 6, and you were, where would you have been?
WTLC.
There you go.
That was my first broadcasting job in Indianapolis, and this was not long after Frank Lloyd had bought the station, and he had hired Steve Scott, and Dr. Lloyd knew my family really well, and probably my mother had said, Frank, you should talk to Claudia about working at the station. So I talked to Steve Scott, and it worked out well, and so I became the morning news anchor for WTLC, and I'm trying to remember the name of the morning DJ on WTLC in 1973, this would have been. But at any rate, it was a good mix because I've got a good voice for going with music, so I could talk and the news. I could end the news and go segue right into his show, and it all worked out very well. So
in the intro, I describe all of your various, I call them reinventions. So gosh, let's go there.
Wow.
I mean, first of all,
how much time do we have? Tom?
How many? Well, you know, I want to make sure that everybody knows is that, you know, we've come in and out of each other's lives for all these years, like old friends do. And then when we do finally reconnect, we just pick up where we left off. Isn't that wonderful about old friends? I'm still making friends. I'm more selective, but it's the old ones that I treasure so much. Because of the shared history, there's a lot to be said about that. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And you don't have to explain so much because those people were there living it with you.
Exactly.
And not your whole life, but certainly parts of it that you don't have to say, well, I was doing blah, 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 because they were there. And
well, you know, our dear friend, mutual friend, Kyle Long, you came back into my life because I heard the two-part podcast, or he did a two-part interview with you later on when his Echoes of Indiana podcast. And so I really encourage everybody to find it on the internet because he went into depth. I think he spent a couple hours together, didn't you?
Actually, yes. Well, yeah, we spent about 3 hours. And Kyle had done extensive research, and I went, wow. How'd you find that?
You know, he was on a recent podcast of mine, and you know, he talked about how his guests, and I complimented on him as a fellow broadcaster. I'm so impressed with his research. He does his homework.
He does, and he does it accurately.
And he says that sometimes he surprises his guests because he knows more than they can remember. And
I was one of those.
And he also tells them things that they didn't even know that they might have achieved this record or that record or this part of history, this book or whatever. And so, you know, Kyle is the respect that he shows his guests is just I admire him so much.
It's tremendous, and he makes you feel so at ease.
Exactly.
So that it's easy to remember and talk and sound not casual, but comfortable, talking about your past.
And you and I both, I think one of the things that drew us, that we had in common at the time, is that, you know, there were a handful of people of color on the air, a handful. Yeah. So it was natural that we gravitated towards each other because we experienced so many things that I don't know back then I don't know that we talked about that much, but we all experienced, if not direct, indirect racism, sexism,
and there was plenty of
homophobia.
There was plenty of direct.
And Kyle, he interviewed me as well for his show, and he asked me very candidly about that, and I was happy to talk about it. I mean, it was good for me to talk about. How about you?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And just remember things that I had not remembered in a very long time. I don't know about repressing it. I just think it's about memory.
Yeah.
And we don't remember all of our experiences. And when other people bring certain things up, it becomes clear, and you go, wow, I'd forgotten all about that. A couple of wonderful old friends of mine and I have started doing Zoom talks. And these are two girlfriends, one who is my oldest friend in the world. She was born 3 months after I was, and I have been part of her life since she was born.
Oh.
And we don't often live in the same place, but we do stay truly connected. And the other person, and we all three grew up in Witherspoon United Presbyterian Church, which was at 25th and Paris back in the day. And people go, Paris? Where is that? Mm-hmm. And but at any rate, that was our church, and we grew up and we did everything in the church, and Girl Scouts, Sunday school, all the things. So
let's talk about your background. Tell me about your family. I knew your mother. Mm-hmm. I didn't know your father, but tell our listeners about your family. I've always found it absolutely fascinating.
Well, my family's been in Indianapolis on my mother's side through her mother. The family has been here since 1904. On my mother's father's side, I believe they came to Indianapolis just after again, in the early 1900s, so sometime around that time. And I am closer to my mom's mother's family than I was to. It's a small family. People always like to tell you how many cousins and aunts and uncles they have. We're pretty small. There were my mom had 2 brothers, and between the 3 of them, they only had 6 children. So that kept it fairly close. No, that's not true, because there are 9. My grandmother had 9 grandchildren, so there were 9 of us, and we don't seem to be procreating too much. So the grandkids, my mother, who people will know, Jean Spears, who was shall I call her a mad preservationist, because Mom got it before a lot of other people did. And she was one of the very first to move into Lockerbie Square when Lockerbie Square was a white slum. And people, including her family, said, Mom, Jean, what are you doing?
She's lost her mind.
Lost her mind. And she bought a 15-room house for $5,000 on Park Avenue. So that was not a bad investment.
And when we first met, I also met your mother, and I visited you at that home, and I'll just never forget. Why I remember so clearly, there was a wonderful portrait or photograph of Frederick Douglass hanging on the wall, this beautiful gold frame. Whatever happened to that?
We still have the frame. I don't know who has that portrait. Maybe my brother.
And why did she hang that there? I'm
because her maiden name is Douglas,
okay.
And there was always the thought that we were distantly related to the Douglases who had moved to Tennessee after leaving the Washington, Maryland, Chesapeake Bay area, and because all of us played violins or stringed instruments. There was that thought also. Haven't done 23andMe or Ancestry.
Yeah.
Now, I've done plenty of looking through records, but it's a matter of getting down to 23andMe.
You know, the goal of this show is to spotlight the arts, and though you are not actively, I mentioned in the introduction that I feel like the core of your identity is that you're an artist, and you'll always be an artist.
Right, absolutely.
And when we met, I remember just being totally impressed with the fact that you had attended Juilliard. I mean, that's like the pinnacle of the arts. So let's start with Juilliard. I don't know that we've ever really talked about, I think I did recently, but we didn't get into it, but I'm just really, interested in your classmates and the state of Juilliard at the time that you went there, and New York City, just the whole thing.
Right.
I mean,
here I was, an Indiana girl, although I had gone to boarding school, which was not a usual
Interlochen.
thing. Interlochen Arts Academy before going to Juilliard. I'm sure that's why I did go to Juilliard. Because if I had stayed at Crispus Attucks, which is where I had gone to my freshman year of high school, which was like a private school in many ways, especially since my grandmother taught there and had and did teach there for 30 years. And everybody knew my grandmother, and so the expectations of being Marion Birch's granddaughter were pretty high.
And you know, the history of that school, people talk about those. Many of them had master's degrees and PhDs.
Pretty much everybody did have
because
master's
they couldn't
degree.
work. They couldn't be hired as some
because of
segregation.
Segregation.
So you had a highly educated faculty.
Exactly. And who were also your neighbors and your friends, and everybody basically went to the same churches. So we saw each other not only in school, but also in church and around the neighborhood, because it really didn't matter whether you had any money or not, and nobody was fabulously wealthy, but some people had more money than others. But it really didn't matter when it came to where you lived, because Indianapolis was segregated. And you're black. We don't care about your bank account. You're black, so you live here. And so the neighborhood was, everybody worked together to help each other, because that's what you had to do, because there was not anybody else that was going to do that for you.
Then there was the music department at Crispus Attucks, and we all know, and it's tied to the story of Indiana Avenue. We're going to get into that because you started an organization, which I want to talk about. But the music department at Crispus Attucks is known for the musicians that came out of there, and worldwide, many of them. In fact, there's a mural on Capitol Avenue on the side of a building, a montage or collage of all of these famous people, Wes Montgomery, and on and on and on. And so those music teachers were brilliant, were they not? And you,
they were.
That's where you studied violin?
Well, I studied violin from 4 on, because my mother played violin, and my grandmother didn't really play violin, but she did play, because she played pretty much all the instruments and all stringed instruments. But she played the piano. That was her basic thing. And plus, she was a brilliant singer. She was the first black choralist in the Indianapolis Symphonic Choir in the late 50s. And we were so very proud of Grandma. One, she had a gorgeous voice. She was a contralto. And so it was only right that she be in the symphonic choir. Plus, she taught music. She was the only woman in the Attucks music department. It was pretty much dominated by men, and it's pretty incredible that they allowed her to come in as a teacher in 1937.
So when did you shift to singing?
I shifted to voice in my junior year at Interlochen, because I was accepted at the academy on violin, and I played in the orchestra my first year. And that's when, because I'm surrounded by these incredibly talented and extraordinarily gifted musicians, I realized I don't want to be either an orchestra violinist or a soloist or anything like that, as if I could be. I wasn't bad, but I wasn't at the level of the kids around me. Now, mind you, these are all freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors in high school, but they were extraordinary musicians. And so, and it was at Interlochen that I did a little bit of singing, I think in the choir or something, and people said, "Oh, you're really good." And I went, "What?" What? So I said, well, maybe I can switch to voice. And they did allow me to switch from violin to voice.
Back in those days, did Interlochen have very much representation of people of color?
No.
No. Of course not.
No, my second year was my first year was the third year of the school. And there were 3 black students out of about 150 total. And then my second year, I believe we were up to 7. And then by my senior year, we were 9, maybe more, and that's black students. We did have students from other parts of the world, but it was not a large group, and the school was not that large. My senior year was the largest class, and we were about 200 kids in the school.
Back then, what was the level of acceptance for you from your white peers?
Oh, of my musical ability, or just social?
Just social, yeah.
I never really had a problem except for my first year, and that was a lot of getting used to. This was 1964. That was pretty early on, and a lot of kids had never lived with another black student, much less competed in an artistic way or even academic way with a black student. And so it was I'm just thinking in context, Claudia, we both know that was also the dawn of the civil rights movement. It had been going on. I mean, I went to visit the school because my parents said, we're not sending our child up to northern Michigan by herself. So the whole family packed up, and we went and spent a weekend at Interlochen the semester before I entered. And they decided that it was safe enough for them to let me go there, and I wouldn't die or be crushed or anything like that.
At the time, I spoke of television coverage of what was going down in Alabama and all of the brutality that was happening. Were you aware of that?
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to get on a freedom bus. I wanted to go and be a part of this freedom movement. And my grandmother said, absolutely not. You have no idea of how to behave when you're in the South. And that struck me as bizarre. And I went, what do you mean? But when I did finally go to the South, I knew exactly what she meant. Plus the fact that I was tall, and Grandma said, no, you will be a target.
So would you say that you grew up in a bubble? Were you sheltered from all of that?
Sheltered.
Yeah.
We were protected from all of that. I don't know that I would say sheltered. I would say protected.
Did you live in a bubble?
Somewhat, yes. Absolutely, actually, yes. And I had no idea that it was a bubble.
You know, we've had discussions about that people aren't aware that Indianapolis has always had a black middle class, and it's known all over the country for that. Talk about that.
Well, in every city where you've got black professionals of one sort or another, and believe me, being a teacher, being a barber, having your own business of whatever definition that is, puts you in a different economic strata that helped you live differently from those who did not have those same opportunities. And I grew up and kind of thought everybody did, and that's just being protected and sheltered. And we had the house at Fox Lake, the cottage at Fox Lake, and we went there, and pretty much school was out on Memorial Day, and we headed for the lake. And we did not come back to Indianapolis for much of anything until Labor Day. And
tell me about Fox Lake. You're working on a documentary?
I started it 30 years ago, and finally, I believe this year we're going to get back into doing, I've got unbelievable footage of what the place looked like 30 years ago, and interviews with many of the elders of Fox Lake.
Where is Fox Lake?
Fox Lake is in the northeastern corner of Indiana. It's contiguous with Angola, which back then was a much, much smaller town, but it is the county seat for Steuben County. And Steuben County is the county with 101 lakes, and Fox Lake is one of them. And it was started by a group of white businessmen who believed that blacks should have the ability to recreate safely in Indiana. And so they started buying land around this lake, around Fox Lake, in the early 1920s. And they offered lots for sale or for rent to blacks starting in about 1925. And we're about to celebrate 100 years of being a black historic resort, and there are only 2 black lake resorts still in existence in the United States. Fox Lake is one of them. The other one is Idlewild, which is in Michigan, which a lot of people have heard about because it was the party place.
Well, you answered my question because it occurred to me, okay, so how is it that in a state where the Ku Klux Klan was active, that blacks were able to find a community around a lake where they could, just sort of have some peace and be amongst themselves without harassment, but it was white people. Wow. And what were their politics?
Well, their politics was that every man is equal.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that.
We want to make sure that our black friends have the same opportunity to live and recreate the way we do.
Has someone researched their history, who these people were?
Not yet, but that's part of what is being done by the Fox Lake Preservation Foundation.
That's a fascinating story.
Oh, it's an amazing story. And it was started by men from Marion, from Grant County, which had the... it's just gone right out of my mind.
Yeah,
the name of the settlement, the black settlements in Indiana.
I wonder if those men may have had like a religious background, like were they Quakers, for instance, or people? They were aware, shall we say? I won't say they weren't strictly Quaker, but certainly that was around them. Angola and Steuben County is not Amish, but you had the Vermonters, as they called them, who, when they came from Vermont and started moving west, they moved along the top of Indiana, and so you had Amish and Mennonite, and the Quakers were more in central Indiana. I see.
But the Mennonites and the Amish were in northern Indiana, and they definitely are still there, and there's definitely a certain feel that is very different from other parts of Indiana.
So did the residents of the lake, they were not only from Indiana, correct? They came from Chicago, various
Some
other
from
places?
Chicago, Detroit, Cincinnati, Toledo, Indianapolis, a lot from Indianapolis at the beginning because they, of course, they arranged for bus tours. People would meet at the Senate Avenue Y, get on a bus, and go to Fox Lake, and then the bus would bring them back.
Was there ever like harassment of people getting there who had to go through?
There may
anything
have
like that?
been. I don't know of that. I don't know about that. I know that the Klan was very active in northeastern Indiana, but they did not bother us at Fox Lake.
Wow.
And I think in part because the Klan in northeastern Indiana was focused mainly on Catholics and Jews. They absolutely.
So was there any kind of cultural life on the lake? Was there music? Was there dance? Was there anything like that, performances of any kind that you recall?
Not performances. I mean, of course, in your home you could do what you wanted, and we had our formal gatherings. We had family picnics and formalized swimming and sort of boys and girls clubs and stuff like that, but nothing. People like to say, well, Duke Ellington came through Fox Lake. Well, Duke may have come to Fox Lake, but he came there to rest because there were a couple of lodges that were there. And, of course, the most famous one is the Mar Fran Motel. But there was another resort at the other end of Fox Lake. Black folks settled on the south side of the lake. On the north side of the lake, there were very few homes, and most of them were white.
So you're still there, and it's been your family for your place.
85 years.
Yeah. And now your children and your grandchildren come visit you. And I know just recently, we'll talk about your kids here in a bit, but...
And cousins.
And so is the state of the lake like what's happened in many other, like Lake James and Lake Jimerson and all Clear Lake? And, I'm from Fort Wayne, as you know, and I grew up in that culture. Everyone went to the lake. I didn't have a cottage, but all my friends, there was always someone's cottage to go to.
Right.
And now a lot of those places that I recall, rustic cottages, small cabins and all, they've been torn down, and people have built, these mini manses.
Right.
What's happened in your leg?
We have remained small and close, and there are a few bigger houses that have been either added on to an extant cottage, or the old cottage was torn down and added on too. But mostly, and there is a historic quarter of Fox Lake that is registered in the National Register of Historic Places. And all of those homes pretty much are what were built 60, 70, and earlier years ago. And so we're trying to maintain the authenticity of the cottage there. We don't like McMansions at Fox Lake. And so if they want to do that on the north side of the lake, then they can go ahead. But we are very mindful of our lake is extraordinarily clean compared to most lakes around. And as you were saying, everybody went to the lake and everybody had a lake place. And when that happens, that means you get boats that don't get cleaned, propellers that...
Give me an idea of that, or tell me about the size of the lake. Can you sail there?
Sailing really isn't, if you have a small, yes, of course.
But do people water ski?
Yes, you can water ski easily, and people have motorboats. And
got it.
we're considering buying a pontoon because we're older and we're just not out there for it.
Oh, there's nothing... Isn't there? There's nothing sweeter than a moonlight ride with your friends.
Or playing cards with your friends out on the pontoon in the middle of the lake. It really is it really is lovely. And so the elders of all of the families that have been there for a while, we love we love the pontoons. The kids have got the motorboats.
Yeah. So let's get back to, I started to talk to you about those New York years. I mean, I'm such a romantic, though, but I'd like to know more about, okay, so what is it that led you to Juilliard, New York?
Well, Juilliard was the #1 conservatory music school in the country, and some would say in the world, and to be accepted there was the pinnacle of success. So people kept saying, you should go, or you should try, you should audition for Juilliard. Now, being from Indianapolis, being a Hoosier, everybody said, well, you can always audition for IU, which was a very good music school. And but I wanted to get away from home. Like everybody does when they go to college. And I said, why would I want to go back to Indiana? And but it was, and I didn't have the best experience when I auditioned at IU. They treated me, even though I had been going to Interlochen Arts Academy, which had the finest musicians, high school musicians of anybody, all they could really see for my future was being a teacher, a music teacher, not a soloist.
Now there you have a good example of institutional racism, do you not?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
What are the elements of that? Well, you and I know it, but let's talk about it.
Well, people assume you can only.
This.
Well, people assume that you can only do so much, and that you, and also the other thing is you won't be comfortable in a more rarefied milieu. Yeah. But that was their thinking, not mine. So I was accepted at IU, but I didn't have to rely on that acceptance. I applied to just about everything I could apply to. My parents spent a lot of money on college applications, but I did. I was lucky enough to be accepted to not only Juilliard, but Curtis, the New England Conservatory of Music, and those were probably the top 3 music.
Damn, you were good.
Yeah, well, I auditioned well. So
Do you remember some of the pieces that you did at those auditions?
Oh, my Lord. Oof. Probably, yeah.
Arias from...
Yes, there's one aria that I did especially, and I did it at Juilliard, and I did it at Juilliard again when I was accepted and I started school there, from Orfeo in Eurydice, Che farò.
Hum a few bars.
Right. Da 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 dum da 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 dum da da dum da dum dum da dum. I haven't vocalized today. That's.
I was joking, but thank you for that. Boy. So was it nerve-wracking?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
What was it like?
But you can't let your well, some people it really does ruin their performance life, but you just have to assume another persona and get out there and do the gig.
How many people were there sitting around at a table, or was it like that? What was it like? Do you remember?
The audition for Juilliard?
Yeah.
There were at least 4, if not more, and it was in a studio. So you had a little more room, like in a...
Juilliard wasn't that back then what it is now, though, did it have the
No,
same...
Juilliard was at the old school, which was at 122nd and Broadway.
Okay, it was this modern thing that they have now by the Lincoln Center.
That was... we switched to that in my junior year
Got
at
it.
Juilliard. So I had 2 years at the old school and 2 years at the new school, which was... tremendous. I love the old school because everybody was close together. It was warm. It was fuzzy. The new Juilliard was filled with marble. It was so cold. It was just cold. So, I preferred the old school, and the hang was better at the old school.
Who did you hang with? Who were your classmates? You had a lot of famous classmates.
Well, I was in theory with Pinky Zuckerman, the violinist, when Pinky was there. Let me put it that way. Who else was...
the acting classes, I guess, is what I'm saying. Did you interact with them?
Oh, that was when we were at Juilliard. Yeah. Well, at Juilliard, at Lincoln Center. The first year they had acting was 1 year at the old school.
Gotcha.
Oh, David Stiers, Patti LuPone,
was Robin Williams there at the time?
He was in my last year at Juilliard at Lincoln Center. He came to Juilliard that I remember, but he was not at the old school. Mm-hmm. Who else was at Juilliard? David Stiers, Patti LuPone. Oh, the other actor who. Oh my goodness, you are testing my memory. But yes, there were quite a few that were and are notables, and occasionally we'll see each other. I'll see LuPone every now and then in New York.
Well, you lived in New York. Were you able to? I often talk to folks who, who went to school there, and they talk about being sponges and absorbing as much as they could of not only the city, the museums, the art, and whatever. Were you able to do that?
I was lucky. When I went to New York, I lucked into having been at Juilliard, and one of my schoolmates at Juilliard, her father was the managing editor of Life magazine, and when I couldn't find a place to live, Mr. Hunt advertised in the Time Life intercompany newsletter saying Juilliard student will exchange babysitting for a place to live. And I ended up living on Fifth Avenue with this extraordinary family and this extraordinary home on Fifth Avenue and 97th Street. And the grandmother of the father of the family, his grandmother had been the leading contralto at the Met at the dawn of the 20th century. So it was not a bad place to be for a neophyte in New York. I would say not. So I was lucky enough to have that kind of introduction to New York society as well as New York living. And I was the first black person of anyone who lived in the building to go up the front elevator. This is 1967.
Really? Oh.
Yeah.
So were you able to take in musical theater, go to shows? Did you go to ballet, the opera? Did you go to the Met? I
did go to the Met. I was not as interested in opera as I was in contemporary music, but that's what they put singers who they think have real talent, because that's the way you make it. You become an opera singer. But I'm very tall, and they didn't know what to do with me in an opera because I would always be taller than the tenor. And
they'd have to put him on a box.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one director had the clever idea of trying to make me bend over to play the parts that I sang, and that didn't work out too well. So,
did you take in cabaret and jazz clubs and explore the neighborhoods?
Well, I took in a lot of jazz because a lot of the people I knew at Interlochen, one, had graduated 2 years before me from Interlochen and went to Juilliard, and they were the stars at Juilliard. Because I played in the orchestra with them at Interlochen, they took me under their wing. And so I just hung with them when I got to New York. And a lot of them were just at the top of the game, of the music game. So if we'd go downtown, we'd go downtown. If we'd go to the Philharmonic, we'd go to the Philharmonic. And I got a chance to live larger than I would have being a 17, suddenly 18-year-old freshman at Juilliard in New York.
And all of this is why I gravitated towards you when I met you, because I did not have that experience. That's the experience that I yearned for as a young theater student, and it never happened. So I got to live vicariously through you. I remember thinking that you, when I first met you, you were so urbane and so sophisticated and so worldly. But truly, when you tell me what you experienced, well, of course you were.
Yeah,
of course you were.
I was very lucky, and my parents supported traveling, and actually my grandparents supported traveling from the time we could walk. Grandma always said, travel.
Yeah.
Travel wherever you want to go, travel.
You know, you're going to come on. As long as I have this podcast, we'll come on and do a part 2, part 3. So sure. We got a lot to talk about. But before I let you go, I need to hear about what you're doing now. I mentioned that you founded an organization, so let's start there.
Okay. Well, I founded an organization focused on revitalizing the Indiana Avenue community. It has been torn apart and left empty and fallow for decades. And now there are lots of people interested in filling in those parking lots with whatever they think is hip and cute. But that has no relationship to the history of the people in place. And so I was called by a friend. There were a few of us that were called to get involved with making sure that any new development on Indiana Avenue was appropriate, was respectful to the history of the people that had been there. Because Indianapolis is doing nothing but growing, and downtown has done a very good job. The mayor and the powers that be have done a very good job in revitalizing the other 3 quadrants of downtown Indianapolis. And Indiana Avenue is the only one that has as much empty space as any of the other quarters here in Indianapolis. So we knew that wasn't going to last long. So the importance now is to make sure that whatever does come to Indiana Avenue comes with a great deal of respect for the past, but with every opportunity to be as fabulous as one can be in the future. Doesn't have to be all black. It simply has to be good. And good design, good purpose, and hopefully involve black people and all the other people who were the west side of Indianapolis. I always like to describe the west side of Indianapolis as being, this is where the or less preferred immigrants came, because it was filled with water, which also meant that it was filled with disease, and because it was just left to be as opposed to being developed. And the less preferred immigrants were the Irish, anyone from Eastern Europe or Southern Europe along the Mediterranean.
My neighborhood, Hallville, Slovenian and Romanian.
Exactly, Eastern Europe, exactly. And black folks who came to be the workers. All the workers of Indianapolis lived a great deal
on the plants.
And they lived in Hallville because
yeah.
the plants were right there. So they
on
were
the
very
river,
close.
which
exactly.
polluted it.
Which polluted it, precisely. And so that was the less desired part of Indianapolis. But now, of course, we're the ones with the water.
Yeah.
And so the water, of course, is such an extraordinary positive element. And so they're cleaning we are cleaning up the west side.
Soon there'll be water skiing on the White River, they say.
Yeah.
So let's shift real quick.
Okay.
You have... The apple does not fall far from the tree. So let's talk about your daughter, Amanda, and this will be available after the fact, but talk about Amanda King.
Right. Someone said, Amanda King, that name sounded awfully familiar. And I said, yep, that's the kid. She is my eldest child, and she was born here in Indianapolis. And we knew from the very beginning that Amanda was going to be a performer of some sort. But she didn't want to be a singer. She didn't want to go into music because she said, well, my mom's a singer, and my mom's so big in music. How could I compete? And I never, ever... At least I thought I never dissuaded her from being anything that she wanted to be. But she was an actor, and she was a very good actor. In fact, she was accepted at Actors Theater of Louisville at the age of 18.
And I might add that I saw her and reviewed her at Theater on the Square when she was in Chorus Line and Little Shop of Horrors.
Wow. There you go.
She was fabulous.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Because she just lights up a stage.
Oh,
she fills a stage.
She had that it factor.
Yeah.
Still does.
Yeah.
So go on.
But she finally, when she was about 30, all of a sudden, she found her voice. And she also, at 30... Oh, I shouldn't be giving out all the things, but she had had her child, her first and only child, and that, of course, changes your body tremendously. And boy, Amanda turned into this fabulous singer, and she has wonderful innate musical talent. And because she never studied music formally, of course, back in the days when Indianapolis Public Schools had music as part of its curriculum, she was a public school student and had wonderful teachers just like I did. But now she's singing, and she's doing both cabaret-style music as well as jazz. And the jazz is a wonderful, it's just wonderful, and she's really good at it. So I'm encouraging her to relax.
And, of course, as I said, this is after the fact, but why was she here?
Well, she's here now working. She has a new album out with Rob Dixon and Steve Ali Quintet, featuring Amanda and Derek Gardner. And it's a pretty big deal because these guys are not chopped liver.
Mm-hmm. Recently, she did a sold-out concert at the District Theater, which I reviewed.
Right. She did a sold-out concert back in September during the Jazz Fest, Indie Jazz Fest, where she also performed and was featured.
That's right.
And so she's doing a couple of shows for the CD. She's coming back to the District Theater to do 4 nights at the beginning of June. Mm-hmm. And it will be her Ladies That Swing show. So she gets to tell a little bit about those wonderful women who knew how to sing, but they also knew how to swing.
Is she not thinking of crossing over? Because recently she reached out because she had some thoughts that she might try pop. Do you think that she's going to expand her repertoire?
I think she's finding her niche in jazz and the Great American Songbook, mm-hmm. and however that music is able to be interpreted.
Yeah.
Because you can do 1,000 things with one song when you know how to interpret it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that she would move over to pop, but what do I know? I'm just her mother.
Claudia, what are your thoughts on, this is a constant theme with me, and hopefully my listeners won't get tired of me bringing it up, but I feel it's my responsibility, given that I have this platform. But what are your thoughts about representation? Do you feel that the ball is finally rolling? And I know from my perspective as a reviewer, I'm seeing more and more and more people of color on stage, but also behind the scenes. Designers, costumers, lighters, directors, producers. I feel like, I feel like finally the momentum is gathered and there's no turning back. What do you think? I'm positive, though, so.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. There certainly is no turning back. And I think the beauty of all of this talent, no matter what color it may be, but people are banding together to bring the best of their personal stories and put them out on stage or behind a camera or in front of a camera to make the entertainment world better.
Recently I saw CBS Sunday Morning, and there was an actor who's won several Tonys but she came to a conclusion. It was an interesting story. Her husband was killed in 9/11, and she decided she did not want to be defined as that person, and it galvanized her to, go forward with her own life. And she became a producer. Now she's producing Broadway musicals, mm-hmm. and she said that she's finally at the table and bringing others to the table. Right. And I don't you think that bodes well for us as a culture, as a society?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we begin to reflect, all of us, and the only way society gets better, the only way society is sustainable, is that all of us are a part of it. Mm-hmm. There's no one particular group that is better than the other, and no matter what anybody says, I firmly believe that, and we all have a little bit of something to contribute.
And what's your perspective about after coming home after years away? How does Indianapolis look to you in general?
Indianapolis wants to be a great city. Indianapolis needs to remember its roots. When I grew up here, yes, there was segregation, but there was also an extraordinary amount of people coming together to talk and to do things. I find that somehow a little different today, and people are erecting walls where there don't need to be walls, and people are assuming that you're one way when you may not be a way, and that's just so limiting, and it's so sophomoric, and Indianapolis is better than that. It's not the Indianapolis I grew up in.
What's your advice to young artists?
First, figure out who you are, and then you can go be whomever you need to be. But you have to have a base from which to work. And it is difficult sometimes knowing who you are. And that reality check doesn't happen overnight, but it is important to do. It's important to be prideful of who you are and how you are. And you don't have to wear it as a badge on your shoulder, but you just need to know who you are and what makes you you.
I'm breaking this down. What about young people who want to be broadcasters? Because you've done that too.
Mm-hmm. Pay attention. That's the most important thing as a broadcaster, especially a broadcast journalist. Pay attention. Assume nothing. Because we really don't know much at all. And find your way of telling the story that is accurate, and I'll use the word comfortable, but it means that people will listen to what you say. And if you are accurate in what you're saying, people will then learn to trust you. And that is worth its weight in gold.
Lastly, what would you say is the through line of the Claudia Polley story? Because someday I see a documentary, I see a musical.
Oh, my.
Well, we didn't even talk about your years as a disco queen in Paris.
That's right.
That's going to keep people coming back, so we'll save that. That's
right.
a whole... Paris is, 5 years of Paris?
Well, 8
oh my
in
goodness.
total, off and on.
That's another
over
show.
8 years. Yeah,
that's another show.
That's it.
So,
it is finding, I guess, my roots, which are Hoosier. I am a Hoosier. You know,
who knew?
I am a Hoosier through and through. And one of the things I learned about being a Hoosier was being inquisitive and wanting to know more, and hopefully being accurate in what and who I am. Now, it has not always been pretty or easy, but trying to figure out and tell that story. And in understanding better my story, I'm able to help other people tell their stories, which is, as you well know, in broadcasting, that's the ace.
Yeah.
Is getting people to tell their stories.
Well, what a pleasure having you on the show. So it's been a great ride. We're still on it. We're still here. That song, We're Still Here from Follies.
That's right. That's right.
So thank you again for giving me your time.
Well, absolutely. Well, as you say.
Oh, by the way, people, you're on the intro of my show and the closing of the show. So
Right.
Thank you for that. I haven't had a chance to say thank you.
I'm always happy
I needed a bit of class.
It was those 8 years in
And
Paris.
who better
that did it.
than Jane Polly's sister, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
And now that Jane is on now that Jane is CBS Sunday morning. I mean, it's a
legend.
perfect.
She's a legend.
She is. She's great. She's great.
Well, she walked these very halls of Channel 8 where
was
we're
going to
doing the
say.
studio.
That's right.
So there you have it. Okay.
Back in the day.
All right. Thank you again.
Thanks, Tom. See you soon.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.